Hey folks, welcome back to another vlog. This is Rick and Morty Season 3, Episode 3, Pickle Rick. This is a commission video for Nick Borovic. Thanks for supporting me, Nick. So, way back when, very early on in doing these vlogs, I did a couple of commissioned vlogs for... I actually forget who it was for. On Rick and Morty. And I didn't like it. I found it cynical, not that funny, kind of depressing. Just didn't care for it. For whatever reason, though, last month I decided to give it a second chance and marathon the whole series. And found I actually really liked it. And this episode really does a great job of highlighting why. This really gets at what the show is non-obviously about. I think if you watch most episodes of the show in isolation, it feels basically like a sci-fi South Park. What I mean is that essentially the core theme of South Park is that it is wrong to care about anything ever. Anyone who has a viewpoint or an opinion or is passionate about something is wrong and should be mocked. Only neutrality, which is to say utter acceptance of the status quo in all things at all times, is acceptable. Anything else is funny and stupid. Which is basically the nerd version of toxic masculinity. It elevates cold reason, which is not a thing human beings are actually capable of, but pretends that it is. Elevates cold reason to like this, the pinnacle of thinking, and any consideration of feelings is wrong, stupid, etc. Of course, what this means is that the feelings that are treated as quote-unquote default are treated as rational, feeling the way that society tells you you're supposed to, basically. In particular, the feelings of white men are treated as rational, and the feelings of everyone else or anyone who contradicts that or suggests that that might not be rational is irrational. That's basically what Rick's character is all about. And that's what this episode does an amazing job of calling him out for. Rick says he turned himself into a pickle out as a challenge to himself. An intellectual challenge, a puzzle to be solved. How can I, having become a pickle, become human again? No arms, no legs, just eyes and a mouth. Well, first of all, he set up an out for himself with the anti-pickle serum. He's lying in the first place about it being a challenge. He just wants to get out of therapy. But it ends up being a challenge when the syringe is taken away. He ends up having to figure out how to slowly work his way up from this incredibly vulnerable position to being quote-unquote a badass, which he accomplishes purely through his intelligence and a great deal of violence. That whole side of the story, the entire adventure of Rick as a Pickle is end-to-end parodying exactly the kind of pop culture that the nerds who feel this way embrace. It's Die Hard with a Pickle. It's, Captain Kirk left alone on an alien planet being hunted, and so he builds a primitive gun and makes gunpowder. Actually more like a mortar, non-exploding mortar than a gun, but point stands. These are the things that nerd culture celebrates, is the use of the mind to accomplish violence. As Rick put it, it's making, creating, destroying. If I don't like something in the world, I change it. That's not how life works. That's just not how it works. There's lots of things in this world that we might not like that we can't change on our own. Either because we don't have the power to do it, or because there are other people who like it the way it is, or who want to change it in a different way. And so it becomes necessary to work with one another. And to do that, we need to be able to understand our own feelings and the feelings of others. That is what humanity is. Humanity is a social creature. And that's why I like how if you watch the series as a whole, what slowly becomes clear is that everyone around Morty derides him as an idiot, but he's not. I've talked about this in these vlogs before. Intelligence is not a thing. It's a whole bunch of different things. And it is possible to be good at some of them and not others. Morty is a great example of this. Morty is not particularly quick-witted. He's not good at science or math. He sometimes struggles to express himself. But as the series goes on, he gets better and better at seeing through bullshit. He gets better and better at seeing, based on people's behavior, what it is that's driving them, what it is they're really feeling. This is because he's had to learn it from Rick, because Rick constantly keeps up this veneer of being the smart, he's the smartest person in the room, he's the rational scientist, which means he has no control whatsoever. He indulges everything. He is always acting 100% on how he feels. And constantly lashing out. His abuse toward Morty, his constant running away, these are all him acting on pure emotion, without thought. The thing is, he's so smart, he can fill in the thought after he does it. He can make up the justification after the fact. As the therapist puts it, using intelligence to justify sickness. Morty is increasingly, he's had quite an education with Rick. He really did learn a great deal traveling with Rick. He learned to see through Rick's bullshit. He's learned to read people's emotions and motivations from their behavior rather than what they say. From how they say it rather than what they say. And from what they do. That's an incredibly useful skill. And an incredibly useful and sadly, particularly among men, uncommon form of intelligence. Women tend to have more emotional intelligence because they have to. Our society forces them to, and so they develop those skills. Men are encouraged to have low emotional intelligence. They're often punished for being in touch with their emotions. And so don't get much chance to practice those skills most of the time. Morty is someone who has actually had a lot of opportunity to practice those skills as a survival necessity, hanging out with Rick. So Rick goes on this pickle adventure, and I do enjoy that this made-up old wives' tale, at least I'm assuming it's made up, about the pickle that comes out of cold soup to punish wasteful children. There's actually some of that going on with Rick. He, after turning himself into a pickle, he encounters cockroaches, which feed on our waste, uses them to make his first suit that he can use, uses that to catch rats, which again feed on our waste, uses that to create the second suit, the main one, the Pickle Rick body, and then starts slaughtering the rats. And that sequence where he's killing the rats, it's funny and cool at first, but at least for me, it went on just a little too long. And I actually think it's very clever that it went on just a little too long, because it feeds directly into this idea that this is too much. That Rick's entire thing is intelligence and violence, and there's too much of it. And the harm it's doing to his family, because we cut directly from there to the family therapy. Now, I went to family therapy as a kid, briefly. My dad and my youngest sister disrupted it immensely. So it didn't accomplish anything. Because, basically my dad just didn't want to be there, didn't think it was helpful, had actually fairly similar attitudes to Rick, and so did everything he could to disrupt it. He would leave in the middle of a session, come back 5 minutes before the end. He would, try to, deflect and change the subject constantly in them. It was just very disruptive. And then my youngest sister would just act out like little kids do. In her case, it might have been not wanting to be there, it might have just been boredom, because Thermos makes a point. Therapy kind of has two modes. It's either intensely upsetting or really boring. I don't think it's entirely true that there's never an aspect of danger to it. Certainly, there's, therapy can be a very intensely emotional experience. Sometimes they are not pleasant or safe emotions. It can, in fact, be... I don't think you're likely to die from therapy, as she says, but it can be quite intense, is my point. It isn't always boring, but sometimes it is, and that's necessary work. And that's the point she's making, that, it's easy when watching the show and looking at individual episodes in isolation to see Rick as this awesome badass. The smartest man in the world, always wins, no prison can hold him, took down the Ricks and the galactic government in one go. He's so awesome. But underneath that, and this is what Morty sees, is a broken man who can't even make a family work. Because everything else he does is running away from who he is. And his alcoholism is an element of that. There's research which shows. So heroin is incredibly addictive. But heroin is also basically the same thing as morphine. People don't usually get addicted to morphine when they go into the hospital and get morphine. Like, if you're in a car accident or whatever, you go into the hospital and they give you morphine for the pain, most people do not become morphine addicts afterwards. Some do. So there's been research into what the difference is, and what they found is that it's got nothing to do with how much morphine they take, nothing to do with how badly they're injured. Once you correct for the factor I'm about to mention, it's nothing to do with family, so it's probably not genetic. The deciding factor is how much social support they get. People who go home to either a very, like, living alone with few friends, or like living situations that are extremely, that are isolated anyway, like they go home to a family that's highly dysfunctional, that kind of thing, are much, much more likely to become addicted. People who have support don't. And that's really what seems to be the underlying cause of addiction, is isolation. That's why Rick's an alcoholic. Rick is an alcoholic because he has pushed away and cut off all connections to other people. And it's why Beth is an alcoholic. Beth is isolated too. She's, learned from Rick that same behavior of not doing the work of emotion in relationships. Summer, we've seen repeatedly, Summer is more like Rick than Morty is. Summer is smarter than Morty. She's quicker to become violent than Morty. She less overtly reacts to bad stuff happening around her than Morty. She gets frightened less easily than Morty, at least visibly frightened. She's the one who's huffing pottery glaze, which I don't even know if that's a thing. Probably not. They probably made it up for the show. On the other hand, teenagers will huff anything. Morty, while he's also doing the thing of expressing his feelings in a very bizarre, just kind of self-destructive way, it's not an addictive thing. It's not drugs, alcohol, huffing. Because he is a little more in contact with emotion than the rest of them, which means he's a little less isolated, even though he is friendless and in a dysfunctional family. He still has some sense of connection. But because Rick doesn't value these things and isn't willing to put in this work, he's undermining himself, Brushing your teeth is boring, but if you don't do it, they rot away. Maybe you can invent some kind of a gadget that'll replace your teeth, but that's extra work. And I don't see Rick inventing a gadget that'll replace love and human connection. So in the end, what this is really about is how destructive this kind of ultra-cynical, rationalist, I'm putting rationalist in big fat scare quotes, rejection of human feeling and human connection, this deliberate not caring, how destructive it really is, which is a very much needed, timely thing because things are getting nasty out there. You know, as I record this, one of the most devastating hurricanes in United States history just hit Houston. An even bigger hurricane has scythed its way through the Caribbean, doing enormous damage, and is bearing down on South Florida. An earthquake in the Gulf of Mexico has, massive earthquake that set off tsunami problems. The entire western half of the country is on fire. And we've got Nazis. Shit's bad. And nobody's getting through this alone. If we're going to get through this, it's going to be together. So this is a good time to point out that this idea of the lone action hero is a very, very broken one. All right. Thanks again, Nick, for commissioning this video. And I'll see all of you next time. Bye. Hope y'all enjoyed that. If you did, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. If you want some more videos right away, you can hop over to my Patreon and see them there. Got other goodies there, blog posts, ability to commission videos. Feel free to check it out. Bye.